Hey guys, welcome back. Week 3. It's chapter 5 and 6. Here we're going to be talking about capital budgeting and the net present value, the IRR, internal rate of return, and risk and portfolio theory. So chapter 5 is going to really be dealing with net present value and different other investment criteria as well. So, capital budgeting again is the process companies use in order to evaluate long-term investments like building a new plant, buying equipment, or launching a product. In order to determine whether a project adds value to that firm, they use different methods. One of those methods is net present value. And the net present value is the difference between the present value of a project's expected cash flows and the initial cost. What are we expecting to receive back based on that initial investment? And so ultimately, if the net present value is greater than zero, you accept the project. But if the net present value is less than zero, you would reject the project. So if you invested, say, $100,000 and expected to earn a $40,000 return for 3 years, if your discount rate is 10%, what would you do? And so that's sort of the steps where you would go through and figure out whether or not you would do it, accept it or reject it. So in that particular case, you're going to get 40,000 year one, 40 in year two, and 40 in year three, and you're going to put each of those over one. It would be one plus the interest rate, so 1.10 raised to the first power for year one, 1.10 raised to the second power for year two, and 1.10 raised to the third power for year three. You calculate what that is by adding it together, and you subtract out the $100,000 initial cost. In this case, you get $1,576. So you would accept the project. That is sort of the mathematical way you do it. I worked for a boss once, and he was very high level. He was selected by one of the Bushes to get the pipelines up and running again in the Middle East after a war. So he was very high up, but he made a comment to me once, and he said he said, I really believe that there is a mathematical answer to everything you do. And when you sit there and you think about it, especially in business, you should be able to know the math behind what you're doing. What is the reason that you're doing it the way you're doing? Why is it important? What is driving this decision? Can you prove it? Can you justify it mathematically? And so a lot of us don't think like that all the time. And so if we can get to the point where we're actually doing the mathematical answer for things, that'll make you a better, successful business person. So the internal rate of return, the IRR, this is the discount rate that makes the net present value zero. So it's the expected rate of return on the investment. You accept it if the IRR is greater than the required rate of return, and you reject it if the IRR is less than the required rate. So whatever that hurdle rate is, are you over it or not? So IRR can give multiple answers if the cash flow changes. Cash flows change signs more than once. It's also not always reliable when you're comparing mutually exclusive projects. But this is something that you would evaluate. It's an imperfect answer. There's also another one that's the payback period. This is how long it takes to recover the initial investment from the project's cash flows. The problem with the payback, so if you paid out $100,000 and you get 25, then 35, then 40, then 50, how many years does it take to really recover it? That's great, but it's very simple, but it ignores the time value of money. Money today is worth more than money tomorrow because of inflation. And so it also ignores cash flows after the payback. We're not really looking at, once it's paid back, it's met the threshold. And so it's really not suitable for strategic or long-term projects. So a $20,000 project earns $5,000 a year, and you pay it back in 4 years. There's also the profitability index, and so here we would take all of the present value of all your future cash flows, and you divide it by your initial investment. If that's greater than one, you accept it. But this really helps when comparing projects of different sizes. So ultimately, if we're looking at the differences between each of the methods, so with a net present value, it uses the time value of money. So does internal rate of return, IRR, and so does the profitability index. But the payback method does not. All four of them are pretty easy to understand in their own way. And when we're talking about good for ranking projects, the net present value and the profitability index are better for that. But the IRR you have to use with caution because it's not always good depending on how signs change. And the payback period. I would not use either one of those to rank the projects. But ultimately, it talks about why this is important, and even looking in the Bible and Luke, Jesus tells us, suppose one of you wants to build a tower, won't you first sit down and estimate the cost? So, capital budgeting is an act of wisdom and planning, and it aligns with biblical values and stewardship and discipline and foresight, planning. All of that is important. So, that's why we do it. And we want to do it the right way. So all of those methods are incomplete in and of themselves, but when you combine them, you get a better picture of projects. So making different investment decisions with risk. So everything that you do that involves something in the future has some level of risk behind it. So risk is the uncertainty about the future outcomes of an investment. So the expected return is the average return if the project were repeated many times. Risk is the variability around that expected return. When we're talking about sensitivity analysis, this measures how changes in one input, sort of like sales, affect the project's net present value. So if a unit sales fall under 10%, what would happen to the NPV? It's really used to identify high leveraged assumptions. And so it helps us sort of identify that is the method you're using, if something happens, what kind of risk is there to this project? There's also scenario analysis. This looks at multiple sets of inputs, best case, uh, base case, and worst case scenarios. It helps to assess more of a range of outcomes instead of a single estimate. The break-even analysis. This helps find the sales level where the net present value equals zero. The different types will be the accounting break-even where net income is zero, the financial break-even where the net present value is zero, or the cash flow break-even where the operating cash flow is zero. The real options. So the definition, the flexibility to make future decisions based on how a project unfolds. So the types of real options. You would abandon these if abandon the project if it fails early, or delay the project in order to gather more information about it. Or you could end up expanding the project if it succeeds. So these are the different options that you have, and it gives you the flexibility to make those future decisions based on what's happening with the project itself. We had a project like that, Project Excel, where we were going to end up, uh, basically we had $1 billion cost initially, and then it went up to 4 billion. And then by the time we finished it, different factors, it went up to 10 billion, and we had to kill the project. So it ruined the numbers. So that is the kind of analysis you're always doing. You're always remaining flexible. Things change. You may have to change your plans. There's also the risk adjusted discount rate. So this is for higher risk projects. So you should use a higher discount rate. It's often based on the firm's hurdle rate. And if a project is riskier than average, you have to raise the required return. So riskier projects, you expect more back. There's a certain certainty equivalent approach, and this adjusts cash flows for risk before discounting them at the risk-free rate. It's more complex, but it also gives some insight into the true risk and reward. There's also the portfolio theory. The risk can be diversified when projects are uncorrelated, and you don't evaluate risk in isolation. You think about the overall portfolio of projects. But when we just talk about how to, diversify risk and even what the Bible has to say about it, so Ecclesiastes 11 tells us that we invest in 7 ventures, yes, and 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. So that is not putting all your eggs in one basket. That's exactly what that is. So, you know, uh, this is sort of uh, the differences between these methods of investment analysis, as well as the different things you have to consider for risk. And that's really what we're covering this week. As always, reach out if you have any questions. I'm always here to help you guys. Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.